Well, good afternoon and welcome to London in this remote world in which we live. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Jenn, and it really is a privilege to be able to introduce so many of these wonderful webinars for the FS Club, where we range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And we'd be unable to do any of these without, in fact, the really great generosity and, may I say, tolerance of our sponsors, who do allow us to cover subjects of interest to the community wherever they come from. And today we're particularly pleased to be introducing a sponsor, Jenn Markey from Entrust. Now, Jenn's going to be talking about something that I think seems to dominate every single conversation I have, not least at a dinner party last night. What is the new hybrid workplace going to be like? But more importantly today, and given what Entrust does, how do we secure it? With all the changes that are going on, these leave many, many chinks in our armor as we try and decide how to secure this workplace. Now, my job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible, which I shall in a moment. But before I do so, just a few items of housekeeping. Firstly, we're delighted that the slides will be put up online. In fact, are already available now. Secondly, a warning to you to keep your fingers on the buzzers, please. We're going to have quite a few polls today, 3 at the opening and 3 at the end. Jenn is very interested in hearing what you think about and what you have to say, and we will in fact save quite a bit of time, some 15 minutes for Q&A, and I'm looking forward to it because this is, as I think all of us are aware, a topic which we're going to be facing for many, many years to come. In fact, perhaps forever. The concept of returning to normal is certainly not the case. It's returning to a new normal. And today's webinar is exploring what that might mean and what we need to do to achieve it safely. So with that, if I may, let's kick off those polls, shall we? So Jenn, this is your first poll, right?
Yes, it is.
So what is your company's biggest concern with a hybrid workforce? Now, Peter, if you don't mind just kicking that off. A, is it lost productivity? B, is it increased attack service with the associated vulnerability? C, maintaining team culture and engagement? D, effective management and development of employees? Or E, the ability to effectively onboard new employees? Now, Jenn and I and the team can't vote, but for those of you out there, I can see that you've already started. We'll leave that poll open for just a split second. And I think we got most of the responses there. And so maintaining team culture and engagement is great, with the second one being effective management and development of employees. All right, shall we launch the second poll then? So what is the largest security vulnerability? Going straight into the poll there. A, is it the security, up there, the security of home and remote internet connections? Is it the use of employee bring your own devices to connect to corporate resources? Is it insecure work environment, people listening in the home offices or coffee shops? Is it poor employee compliance? Or is it the inability to verify identities and securely onboard people? So, as ever, Jenn, the FS Club audience is very opinionated, and half of the audience have voted already. But we'll leave it open just a second for those who are pondering this.
I can imagine. I mean, the hybrid workforce really is part of our new normal. We're all kind of living it, breathing it. So it's interesting to see how much commonality there is across the audience today. Indeed.
So we'll just shut that one and open that. This one's a bit more split. We've got basically 2, security of home and poor employee compliance. Okay. As outstanding, an insecure work environment as the other one. Okay. And we'll launch the third poll if we may. So what has been the biggest challenge in planning for return to the office? Workplace safety, staff willingness to return, managing access, or something else? And I can tell our audience are now habitués of poll taking, as well over half have voted. We'll leave it open for just a few more seconds before closing. Okay, and Peter, if you want to present those results as well. This one, overwhelmingly, nearly 2/3, staff willingness to return. So maintaining the team and the culture, security of the home area, as well as poor employee compliance for the second set of challenges, and thirdly, very much the staff willingness to return. Well, I think that gives you a good flavor of what's on the audience's mind, and I'm glad to say, having had a preview of Jenn's slides, believe it or not, she's going to be talking about this. So over to you, Jenn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Michael. So essentially, we at Entrust, we did a survey, I guess probably about a couple months ago now, to sort of survey both employees and employers about their intentions to return to work, to offer a hybrid workplace, and all the rest of it. So some of the content I'll be sharing with you today supports the results of that survey. So very much no surprise here, 91% of employees are in favor of a hybrid work environment. That last poll just highlighted that 61% of people are concerned about the willingness of people to return to the office. So really quite a challenge, and how do leaders and organizations help navigate that? Some of the challenges, as were highlighted in the polls, is the security or lack of security of home internet connections. The whole home office environment is less than secure, let alone when you're working in a coffee shop or some other location. And just the internet connections themselves. So how many of you have changed, or how many of you know people who have changed their internet router over the past 20 months? And that dovetails directly into some of the challenges that organizations are concerned about, which is the leakage of sensitive company information from both cyberattacks from bad actors and other, I guess, not malicious intent, but just human or manual error. And all of this is really closely tied to data remaining secure outside of the office. And so if you think back, even pre-pandemic, the concept of network perimeter was disappearing. And with everybody working from home, there is no network perimeter anymore. And that really gets down to having identity essentially as being the new perimeter as we navigate this new hybrid workplace. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges, some of the research. So one of the things about hybrid is sort of a dichotomy. There's the desire for people to work from home. They cite increased productivity, but at the same time, they do also express some frustration with some of the friction that they've encountered because of the need to have security in those types of environments. So, and the other dichotomy here is that people feel generally more productive, and some of the studies support that as well, but they also express concerns over a higher level of burnout. So not surprisingly, when you've got 91% of employees desiring to have a hybrid workplace, you've got 80% of company leaders saying that they're either currently using or considering a hybrid workplace. So really understanding that this is something that employees want. Many of you probably have heard the term the Great Resignation. There is a lot of pressure to retain employees in this environment and to recruit new ones. And really, a lot of that comes down to the hybrid workplace, the opportunity for that flexibility being a key sweetener for those employees to both join your organization and stay. Then you've got the challenge, you're looking at the lack of security in home office environments, and that has naturally caused a lot of organizations to implement new security features. Probably MFA, as we'll see in a bit, is probably the biggest one. And what that has, when you introduce certain security measures and you use, some measures are frictionless and some introduce friction. And so you have here, over half of employees reporting that they've had at least 6 instances of lost productivity due to network access issues. I know even when I was coming into this webinar this morning, I got kicked out and had to go back in again. So it wasn't a security challenge, but you can definitely see the challenge that a digital first world presents in terms of making sure that those collaboration tools that we've all come to know and love are available for us day in and day out. And part of the reason for that increased friction is you've got 21% of leaders citing the leakage of sensitive company data as among their top security challenges. So if you go on the other side to try to address the security challenges, one of the things is you're seeing broad MFA adoption. I think Salesforce has said last week it'll go to MFA in, I think it's January of this coming year. You can have MFA being broadly adopted on the consumer side. Both Amazon and now Google have adopted MFA. MFA is multi-factor authentication. Very simplistically, it's either something you have, something you know, or something you are. And MFA is two or more factors around that. So one of the things, going back to that friction on the previous column, is that if you can adopt MFA, but it doesn't have to inject friction. If you look for modern authentication methods, so passwordless is probably the biggest one here. If you remove the password, you essentially remove all password hacks. And so if you are able to implement a passwordless solution as an MFA option, that really becomes something that is both more secure and more productive from a user perspective. So it's a win-win. And really, in the survey, we uncovered that almost 3/4, or actually more than 3/4 of organizations were using biometrics and mobile push authentication to accomplish passwordless MFA. And then the other area is around training. 81% of business leaders said that they offered employees home office data security training, but 61% of employees said their company said their company offered that training. So there's kind of a disconnect between what employers think they're doing and what employees think they're doing. And I think part of that has to do with the practicality of that training. Is it an online training about how to change your password regularly, or is it how to go change your internet router? So very different levels of expectations when it comes to training. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our solutions in this particular place. So one of the challenges, hybrid work is here to stay. So many of you are on the webinar today are, what does that mean? What do I do now? One of the key challenges is, when you have no network perimeter, when identity is now that perimeter, how do you verify someone is who they say they are? I think, I know I've hired people over the past 20 months. I work with them day in, day out. I have never actually physically met them face to face. And I think that's going to become increasingly common that's out there. So, and that's just both an employee challenge as well as a consumer challenge. So if you think about something like identity proofing offers fully self-service digital identity verification with the convenience of a smartphone. So all you need is your smartphone, your government issued ID, and a selfie. And basically you take the high resolution image of your ID and your selfie, and basically what happens is we can validate that that is an authentic government document, that is a valid instance of that document, which means it hasn't been tampered with, it's not expired, that you are the person on that credential, that's the image, and some liveness detection checking to make sure it's not a photo, that I am a real person, to make sure that you're presenting it. And then once that person is verified, it's about issuing some type of credential. And so the employee can be authenticated to gain secure access to your corporate resources. And it's really important to differentiate between establishing trust up front and maintaining it over time, because both are essential. You don't just hand over, say, a new hire the keys to the proverbial castle and then never check in on them again. So if you think about it, it's really about using things like adaptive risk-based authentication, so you continuously monitor both the user and the device behavior. If you think of things like behavioral biometrics, is that individual acting as an individual, or do they look more like a bot or other suspicious patterns out there? The device itself, looking at the device fingerprint, the device reputation, is that device operating behind a Tor-based browser or proxy? Is it a rooted device or jailbroken? So really making sure that you're maintaining that trust over time. And so everything we've talked about right now is for a single user with a single user credential. And I'm sure we all know the world just isn't that easy or simple. So if you think about it, how many of you, if you think in the back of your head, how many of you are pursuing cloud migration today? And if you think about it, you've got, there you go, see, Michael's got cloud migration on the brain. So if you think about it, you have, they say that for large or enterprise, it's typically going to take 10+ full years to accomplish full cloud migration. And within that context, that means you're going to be operating in a hybrid multi-cloud environment for those 10 years. And for those of you who are lucky enough not to have old legacy stuff and on-prem stuff, and you're not making that migration, but you're fully cloud, don't get too excited, because the reality is you're probably still going to have a multi-cloud environment, because most organizations, Gartner cites 81% of organizations will have a multi-cloud strategy long-term, because nobody wants to put all their eggs in the proverbial one basket. Every cloud provider, whether it's AWS, Google, Microsoft, you don't want to be beholden to them. So really a multi-cloud strategy being the long-term strategy of most organizations going forward. And so when you think about that, every single app that you have, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, wherever, it has its own identity concept. So that means you have an identity instance, so one user, one credential. And so when you don't bring all those identities together through a unified identity and access management solution, that means a lot of manual reprovisioning from system to system, and that adds a whole bunch of cost, complexity, and risk. And so if you think about something like identity orchestration, which basically acts as a unified identity provider, you're able to swap all that risk, cost, and complexity for essentially security, simplicity, and scalability. So now I asked you to think back to, when the first lockdown orders came into effect and you were told literally to have everyone working from home tomorrow. So within that, and I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school here. I think a few shortcuts were likely necessary, and that security may not have been as optimal as it normally was. And so we refer to that as kind of this bubble gum and duct tape. And it might have been okay if this was a temporary solution, but the hybrid workplace is permanent. That's what we're seeing unfold. So now is really the time to take stock of your IT security and revisit all those measures with a more permanent filter. So things we talked about adopting MFA. Most organizations are going down that path, but be smart about it. Look for intelligent modern authentication, things like passwordless, things like adaptive risk-based authentication, mobile push notifications. So you add that security, you implement MFA without adding user friction. One of the other challenges is around, making sure or helping to ensure that your employees have good cybersecurity, good password hygiene. And, part of that just comes down to make it easier for them. Passwordless, you eliminate the password, great password hygiene. If you're going to stick with the password, single sign-on definitely reduces the burden on employees. I don't know how many passwords you have put in even today, whether that's in your workplace or consumer, but once you get beyond 3, 5 passwords, you can't remember them. So what do? You do things, really, really bad things. You write them down. You reuse them across accounts. You recycle them. That's human behavior. So unless we make it easy, expect those types of challenges. Securing your VPN connections, I'm sure most of you have already done that. Looking for things like a higher level of assurance, so PKI-based credentials, so a high assurance credential for a workforce so they securely access your environment, and you're basically able to enable that securely and productively if you model that with a password implementation. The cloud migration, I think that's just the reality we're in. Cloud migration is here to stay long term, so looking towards identity orchestration. And if you're using keys and certificates, using HSMs to make sure that they are stored properly and correctly. So as you embrace all of this and you start along this journey, really what we would encourage you is to embrace what we call a zero trust framework. It could be a framework, it could be approach, but it's basically based on the concept of never trust, always verify. And so the concept of zero trust is based around least privileged access, giving users and entities, whether they're devices, only the permissions that they require to do the job ahead of them. And so that is what zero trust is all about. So you assume the network is always hostile. You are looking for external, internal threats at all times. Network locality is not sufficient for deciding trust in the network. And every device, every user, and every network flow needs to be authenticated and authorized. And that's zero trust. So it's all about validate, control, and protect in the new hybrid workplace. So with that, I will pass it back to Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Jen, for that. We've got a few more polls, is that correct, Peter, that we'd like to run quickly just to get a flavor of the audience again? So this one is our fourth poll. What technologies or tools have you deployed to secure your hybrid workforce? And you can click on several, if that's the case. The virtual private network, VPN, multi-factor authentication, MFA, single sign-on, passwordless login, or adaptive risk-based authentication. Again, just looking at our ever opinionated audience, or very fast-thinking audience, I should probably say. Over 50% have voted. Leave it open for just a few more seconds, and we'll close that one and show those results. So very much VPNs and MFA and a little bit of single sign-on, less on passwordless login and adaptive risk-based authentication. And I think generally move back, we might want to hear a little bit more from you on single sign-on in the question area. If we could open the fifth poll, please, Peter. Since the initial lockdowns, have you revisited your cybersecurity infrastructure within the context of a permanent hybrid workplace? In other words, we're going to be this way for a long time. And have you done a serious revisit, or were you just sort of satisfied you managed to get through the pandemic workplace changes and you haven't bothered to return for a rethink. Again, people pondering that one. We're up to 50% of the vote, and let's show those results, which is great. And so 2/3 of the audience have revisited Jenn, which is a good thing. And our final and sixth poll, just to get a flavor here, we've got, how do you verify the identities of new hires working remotely? So do you use digital identity proofing? Are you emailed photos of identity credentials? Are you looking at video conferencing? Or you do actual in-person meetings, or have you got something else? So we'll just have a quick look at that. Audience thinking about this for a moment. Okay, we're up to 50% of the audience present those results. So it's quite interesting here, fairly broadly spread, actual video conferences, in-person meetings, and digital identity proofing, very much the leaders there. Okay. Well, Jenn, that is fascinating, and what a way around the houses here, because I know it's a huge subject. I was wondering if you could just give a little bit more flavor of single sign-on and how that works in the Entrust environment.
Sure. So IDaaS, Identity as a Service, is our cloud-based offering within our Entrust Identity portfolio. Single sign-on is simply a feature where you, the individual, the employee, is granted one set of secure login credentials to access all of the different systems. So basically, and the complexity is managed both from the IT perspective as well as from the employee perspective. So that individual, when they log in with their network password, that grants them automatic access to all of the applications, whether say it's Salesforce, Outlook, whatever, at the same time. So you never have to go in and re-authenticate yourself over and over and over again, which, you know, to have to do that over and over again, especially when you have to put in the same credentials, it's frustrating, and it's a source of, it's a time suck. It basically hurts your productivity, and employees are always like, you know, why do I have to do this? You've already authenticated me. I haven't left my desk. I'm just logging into their application. Why can't you just pass me through? So it's a seamless pass through of their credentials, federated single sign-on.
Great. Now, folks, please do type your questions in. We've got time for a bit here. Firstly, I'm going to kick off with a question from Sebastian Torbos. Are there standards for establishing employee identities, minimum requirements? I mean, we've seen, Jenn, you know, a lot of work in the government sector, a lot of work on digital identity in the crypto world. There's a lot of talk going on. But are there standards for establishing employee identities? Or if not strict standards, are there emerging sort of standards in terms of what's normal?
Well, there isn't, to the best of my knowledge, an employee standard as to what you can do. A lot of the current debate around return to work in the office has to do with employee privacy, and a lot of it has to do with, in different jurisdictions, vaccine mandates and test credentials. And so a lot of this is, a lot of the standards around that are related more to employee privacy and trying to maintain that versus how you would establish identity per se. So you look at GDPR as being one of the considerations around that. From the perspective of how to establish employee identity, there are some best practices that are out there. I would even say that digital identity proofing is arguably a lot more secure way to verify someone's credentials than, say, going in your first day to the payroll assistant and showing them your national ID card or whatever you use in your particular country to validate who you are, and basically to get you on the tax rolls. It's a web. Some of the standards come from the travel sector, like you see them with ICAO, you see different standards that are out there, but nothing really specific to the employee base at this point in time. But there's so much debate around this, and so much of it is wrapped up, understandably, in an employee's right to privacy.
Now, in my experience, there are a lot of different methods for passwordless sign-on. do you want to talk through a couple of the ones that you recommend as being sort of the right way to tackle it?
I wouldn't say there's a right way and a wrong way. It's important to understand that a passwordless experience isn't always passwordless. So mobile push authentication is a passwordless experience, but it still backs to an actual password. So, and as long as that password exists, you are susceptible to password hacks. But it is a far superior experience from the user perspective, and maybe something that your organization wants to consider. There's another way to implement passwordless is with Fido Keys. Fido Keys, again, Fido Keys, when you initially set up the Fido key, it relies on a password to do that. And that password exists past initial registration. So there is still potentially a restriction, I won't say a vulnerability, but there is still potentially a risk factor there. It is more secure than mobile push notifications. It is a passwordless experience, but again, it relies on a Fido key. So, possession doesn't guarantee identity. So if I have your Fido key, I can get access to your system. But, generally, if you have security of the Fido key, it's control of a chain of custody around the Fido key itself, then you're fine. It's a very good solution. We support mobile push. We support Fido. The third area, which we also support, is what we call high assurance credential-based passwordless authentication, where essentially we provision a digital certificate, basically a PKI-based credential, onto the employee's smartphone, and that becomes their trusted digital workplace identity, wherever that workplace might be. So whenever that phone is unlocked with their biometrics, their face ID or fingerprint recognition, and they're in close proximity of their workstation with their phone, they are automatically logged into the workstation and single signed on to all of their applications. So very seamless, secure situation. And when you say you want to go for lunch, take a break, you walk away with your phone, you're automatically logged out. So again, it addresses that concern. So three major groupings or buckets of passwordless with mobile push authentications, passwordless with Fido keys, and high assurance credential-based passwordless. The high assurance credential-based passwordless is really the only solution that actually removes the password itself.
Got a lot of questions here. Chris Smith, are there any statistics on employee retention when they're onboarded remotely? Understanding we've had less than 2 years of the new normal. In other words, did we hire the right person? Do you have any flavor on that at the moment?
Sorry, I'm having audio challenges. I couldn't get the question.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, Chris Smith asking, are there any statistics on employee retention when the employees have been onboarded remotely, i.e., without meeting anybody? Chris, understanding that it's only about 2 years.
I think the question was about statistics to do with remote onboarding of employees.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think if I'm physically located in Canada, and we are still in I won't say a lockdown, but we're not in most cases back to the office yet. We theoretically will be going back in January. So anyone that we have brought in, hired, done anything with, it has all been remote out of necessity. I would imagine the same is true even in hybrid workplaces. I think so. I think, if I look at the last year and a half, you had to be remote onboarded. You weren't going into a physical office. You couldn't due to lockdown measures. I think increasingly, though, you've got large employers that are looking to hire talent anywhere around the globe. So even as the offices reopen, you're still going to have these remote employees that are permanently remote. And so the need to onboard them as well. I think, and the other thing I think around the remote onboarding of employees is it allows you to be, it's a more streamlined, more productive way to go about this, both for the employee as well as for the enterprise themselves. So you don't spend your whole first day with the HR person going through a bunch of forms and showing ID. So it's a way to do it from the comfort of your own couch, and it's done. So I think you're going to see it become the majority of the time people who remotely onboarded versus the minority. I do think you'll still, obviously, as we do return to some semblance of normal, we will have more people going into the office. But I think even then, I think it'll be both the employee's choice as well as the organization's choice to rely more on these tools. There's also no reason why you have to have the HR person themselves might be remote, so they're going to want to have those remote tools. So I think across, whether it's onboarding, whether it's the employee experience, whether it's on the consumer world, we have really entered into what I frame as a digital first world. So when we do things digitally, that becomes the preferred method of operation, with the physical world being still important, but a secondary, or even in some cases a fallback position. So I think I don't have a firm stat on identity proofing, but I think you will see it to be used more often than not going forward.
Your opening poll asked about well, the answer to your opening poll was people believing that maintaining the team and the culture was really the most important thing. Phil Williams has got a few questions here, and we might answer these sort of snappily, but his first is, in your opinion, do you think the workforce are happier working from home or working in a hybrid?
Well, I think the majority of them are very happy with a hybrid solution. I think the amount of flexibility it's given people to have a better work-life balance, to be able to, put in a load of laundry in the middle of the day, go out and do some errands, do your email at night, whatever strikes you. I think that flexibility is kind of that genie's out of the bottle. I don't think a full remote is desirable for the majority of the populace. I do think a significant number of people would be happy. I think it depends what type of career you are in, what type of role you have in the organization. If you're more of an individual contributor, a remote location, remote work is more sustainable. But if you're part of a team environment, if you're more on the outward-facing sales, marketing, those types of services organizations, I think it's really difficult to have that as an entirely remote position. I think the other challenge that we're going to see as we enter this hybrid workplace is how do we re-inject that team. Like, I think what's been really interesting, based on my own personal experience over the last 20 months, we are a global organization. So we have offices all around the world, 2,500 different employees. And what was interesting as we went remote is that everybody had an equal seat at the table, no matter where you were in the world, which because inevitably it was always you'd be in this big meeting conference room with some poor people on the end of this conference line that were forgotten. But all of a sudden we're all sitting here, live in person on the same Zoom call. So everybody had an equal seat, which was really novel. But the other thing is that the pandemic really, in somewhat ways, unified the water cooler chat around the globe. Everybody wants to know what's going on in Singapore, what's happening in London, where are we in Buenos Aires, right? It was really, how are things happening in your world today? And we didn't really ever have that level of connection almost overnight. So there was that was interesting as well. So as we return to more of a hybrid model, it's going to be it's going to be important for companies to remember that positive energy and collaboration that happens, so that you don't end up with back to that conference line and somebody's just hanging off and basically dying at the other end of. So that you keep that level of collaboration and you get all those different, because we're stronger together, really. I mean, you've got different cultures, you've got different perspectives, different roles, and that definitely makes the organization stronger. I think it's been one of the good things that's come out of this. So how do you keep that going? Having said that, I think a lot of why the last 20 months went as well as it did was because people had already established some relationships in organizations. And I think, it'd be difficult for someone that just joined. I mentioned I have an employee that I've never met, and he kind of is always wondering, well, where do I fit? And what his whole experience is via Zoom. So, he's going to want to build some of those relationships that we already had pre-built going in. I also think that how long can you sustain those relationships? You can't keep it forever. So, I mean, simplistically, I think there's some good things that come out of this. I think it depends what type of role you have. It's also where you are in your career. If you're younger and you're trying to climb that corporate ladder, you're going to want to get FaceTime, and you're probably going to want to make that not really all digital FaceTime. So that's another challenge. And then you will see. I think the other thing you're seeing is some organizations like Shopify and others are doing away with the physical office, and they're turning them into collaboration centers. So when people get together, they come into this collaboration center and they meet there and then they leave. But there's not a place to go in and do your work day in, day out. So that's my perspective on what's happening and sort of why.
Very good. Yeah, it's on the internet, nobody knows who's the boss. It's an interesting point, perhaps. Ian Harris and Sebastian Tormos together in a way. Ian asked, he's in general agreement with your approach to hybrid, but how do you adapt such an approach to a workforce that mostly comprises occasional, casual, or voluntary workers, where it could be excessive or impractical to treat them all in a manner appropriate to staff? And Sebastian Tormos on, what about a large workforce's physical access to the offices? How do you manage their access badges?
A couple of things. I mean, some of it to do with contract forces, or even if you look at some enterprises that have had to scale rapidly up and down in staff over the given level of uncertainty with lockdowns and what's happened. I think digital identity proofing definitely helps with that, being able to easily onboard individuals, whether they're contractors, volunteers, or whatever. The other thing is kind of this visitor management and the return to the office, and it's not just assuring that somebody is who they say they are, but being able to provide some level of safety to the employees that are there. So we do also offer instant identity as a service, which are basically employee badges, or they're just badges in general. So with a visitor management system, to make sure that somebody has the credentials and that they are in compliance with whatever both the organization policies are, as well as the local health mandate. So being able to issue a credential on the spot that they can then use to gain secure access to the facility when they are there, and basically hand it in when they're not is something else. So there's basically essentially the badge printers to do that with some intelligence as to what the logic is behind it.
Good. A comment here from John O'Hara. He says it's not really a question, and he doesn't want to be impolite to your excellent presentation. But in his opinion, Microsoft has already won the IDAS fight already. Everybody's running Active Directory on premises. Office 365 has stellar uptake, but Microsoft has this by default. Others can help make bridging heterogeneity and lowering vendor risk, but mapping real people reliably onto Active Directory is still a continuing challenge. Interesting comment there. But if we could return to the culture bit, I think everybody's very interested in Entrust, global reach here. So Phil Williams again. Are there any national trends you're confident of? Are some countries more likely to return fully to the office or to stay at home? Is there a generation gap? Older workers keener to stay at home, and younger workers wishing to return to the buzz of the office? You spoke about younger workers wanting more face time. Any trends that you see as definite?
Well, I think before I address that, I just wanted to comment on the comment about Microsoft. Obviously, Microsoft does provide a level of authentication with their platform. I mean, it is definitely it gives you basic MFA. If you're looking for things that are more high assurance credential-based passwordless, it can't supply that. You're also becoming more wedded to the Active Directory environment. And if you think about your partners, contractors, all of that is always a pain to deal with it. And then if you think the other thing is about, eggs in the basket from a Microsoft perspective, they're going to provide authentication and security best for their own platforms, their own solutions. But, if you have a Microsoft outage, then all of a sudden you can't get access to things like Salesforce and other applications as well. So there are some reasons why you want to try to bring this together, particularly with the identity orchestration. So you have it's the best of all worlds in that scenario. So regards to national trends, I think you're going to see more of the countries with older demographics. You're already starting to see this in terms of Western European countries, North American countries, embrace more of the hybrid workplace, more permanent remote individuals. Those workers tend to be older as well. I think younger workers, they generally would prefer to have more face time in the office. In some locations, those younger workers are still living with their parents, so they have an added desire to get into the office and do different things and meet other people that are out there. So I think very, very generally, those would be two trends that I would expect. I think what's going to be interesting to see is how sustainable is the hybrid workplace. I mean, so you've got employers are I think in many cases, they're embracing this because they have to, because they're worried about employee attrition and a tight labor market, particularly in areas like IT and technology skills. But from the employee perspective, they want it. So it'll be interesting to see how that balance happens. You know, I have personal friends and colleagues, not colleagues at Entrust, but personal friends that their employers are forcing them back to the office, and they're just walking. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic as it unfolds, and how long it goes forward. So I think those are the few things that I would call out around that.
Just a quick one. We've got time for two, I think. Donald McCrae, any quick tips for running hybrid meetings fairly and efficiently?
Hybrid meetings, so have an agenda, know who the individuals are. I think it helps to have cameras on at the beginning, so people, you know, are engaged. Not everybody's camera friendly, and not everybody has perfect internet access all the time. So, but at least at the beginning to kick things off, I think it helps. And then I think to consciously use tools that allow for collaboration. And Teams has been great. We're using GoToWebinar today. So, you know, using those collaboration tools and using them in a hybrid environment is going to be really important. So I'm going to a physical meeting next week for planning sessions, but some of the people will still be remote. So how do we keep them engaged in that environment? So trying to have that hybrid world in a physical meeting is going to be incredibly important. And some people are more talkative and some people are more comfortable in this environment than others. So creating opportunities for everyone to answer a question or contribute, making sure that you have somebody that's, you know, drawing more of the quieter people out into the conversation, because some people will naturally dominate, and unfortunately in a virtual world that can be all too easy to do, especially when your camera's off.
And a final one, it's more of a comment from Hugh Purser, where he says, you know, looking at the risk-loss equation for corporations of work at home, to him, surely the biggest potential cost is cyber attack and loss of data and reputation. For Hugh, this surpasses the costs of losing or not being able to recruit staff. Personally, you know, I might make the opposite remark, but what do you think, Jenn?
Well, I think it's around finding the right balance. I mean, you at the one extreme, you don't want to be the latest victim of a ransomware attack and basically be frozen to do any business. And at the other end of the spectrum, you don't want to have an empty shell of an office with no people to do any work. That either one of those is not going to work out. So really, it's about looking for those opportunities where you increase both the security and the productivity of the employees at the same time. And it was kind of, I don't know, a little disheartening when on one of the earlier polls, which said, you know, these are the things we've implemented. We've done MFA, we've done VPN, but we haven't done SSO, and we haven't done passwordless, and we haven't done adaptive risk-based authentication. Well, passwordless, adaptive risk-based authentication, and single sign-on are all ways that you can improve security and productivity at the same time. And I think that's where a lot of the focus should be on, so that we can literally have our cake and eat it too. Because the other solution is just binary. You're going to be out of business one way or the other. No staff, no system access. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, Jenn, we've run out of time, but may I say thank you so much. We're all learning, and we're all in it together, I think. And you coming and sharing from the perspective of a global corporation what you and your clients are doing, I think is helping all of us learn what's out there. I've got 3 quick rounds of thanks, if I may. Firstly, to our sponsors, including Entrust, for allowing us to range widely and freely. And this is very much in the sweet spot. What's the workplace of the future going to look like? We'd like to thank all of you for helping us to run these webinars and many of the other things on FS Club. Secondly, to you, the audience, you have been particularly vibrant today. All of your comments and questions with your email will be sent to Jenn so that she may wish to reply more fulsomely. But please note that what she covered and the slides, but also the reports, are there in the chat room and on the website. We do have a number of events forthcoming. I won't read through them, but you know where to go. Go to the website and check them out. There's a lot happening, including next week, the launch of the Smart Centers Index. So lots occurring. But finally, if I may, Jenn, a really warm thanks to you. I funnily enough, always thought I'd get tired of discussions on the hybrid workplace or the workplace from home and all. And honestly, although it keeps coming up, I think we are still learning. But within all of that, the mantra that you gave us of validate, control, and protect is one that we must keep coming back to. We'll never finish. We need to keep that cycle going. Now, unfortunately, technology lets us down in one other way, which is not really possible for me to open the floodgates of applause. So I will clap here in London to you over in Canada. But I can assure you from the comments that you'll receive and the audience of Vibrancy today, it's been extremely well received. And for that, we most sincerely thank you and hope to see you again as this area evolves. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. A pleasure.